Hello, Year 10, and welcome back to your second lesson this week, looking at why was 1985 a turning point in the Cold War. If you've not done so already, please can you go back and complete the first bit of work for this week, looking at Ronald Reagan from 1980 to 1985, just so that it makes sense chronologically. Going over the rules again very quickly, please can you make sure your work is submitted by Sunday the 3rd of May at 5 p.m. Please make sure you hit that submit button as well so we definitely get your work. The worksheets in Google Classrooms for you to complete the tasks as we're going along. Pen and paper might help to make notes, and there is an online copy of the Cold War Revision Guide in Google Classrooms for you to refer to with today's lesson, pages 33 to 36. It's the same guide you've already got a physical copy of. If anything's not clear after you followed those steps, please feel free to email your teacher or myself so we can help. So, we've already looked at Ronald Reagan and how he made the Cold War tension increase from 1980 to 1985. But we also said that he'd faced problems not being able to hold face-to-face talks with Soviet leaders, try to get better relations. Because they'd been so old and because of ill health, we'd seen 3 leaders die in a relatively short space of time. Now, the USSR seemed to be aware of this, and they appointed a much younger person to be in charge next, Mikhail Gorbachev, and he changes the entire Cold War. Gorbachev is appointed, and he's so young when he's appointed that actually, well, compared to the other leaders at the time, he's actually still around today. Gorbachev is 89 now today. Gorbachev faced a huge amount of problems when he became leader. Just going to go over them now. So the first one is economical problems. The USSR is spending an incredible amount of money. It has spent billions on space race, weapons with the arms race, it's supporting the economy of the other satellite states, and there is so much money being spent that when Gorbachev comes in charge, the USSR is very close to being bankrupt. There's social problems. A lot of people in the USSR, and especially the satellite states, do not like being communist. They don't like being controlled by the USSR. And that means that Gorbachev has to try to please these people. Now, the picture here is from the 1980s, and it's a Polish group called Solidarity. We're going to go into them in a lot more detail next lesson because they are one of the key parts to the Cold War ending. But Gorbachev certainly has to keep people happy within the satellite states and USSR and improve their living conditions and way of life. The expense of keeping these satellite states, the expense of needing to pay for the military, we've already looked at the fact that the Soviet army is in Afghanistan at this point. You need a secret police force to keep this communist dictatorship going. All of this expense adds up year after year. A lack of quality goods. We've looked before at the problems with communism. Everyone's guaranteed a job, and therefore you don't work as hard as you probably could do. And that meant the USSR was producing goods that no one really wanted to buy. One example here is the Lada car that was produced by the USSR. And in fact, other areas would say, look, we'll buy the raw materials off you, we'll buy the steel, we'll buy the wood and so on. Just for goodness sake, don't actually try and make anything out of it because no one will want that. We'll just buy the raw materials off you. If the USSR could make better quality goods and make people care more about what they were producing, they would be able to bring more money into their economy. There was a lack of future plans because, again, those 3 leaders that had died in such a short space of time, Brezhnev, Andropov, and Cherenko. And so they hadn't really planned for the future. They hadn't really planned what was going to happen, and so Gorbachev comes in and he's got to try to work that out. There was no clear strategy for the USSR. All 3 of those leaders had different ideas and different aims that they didn't get a chance to bring in before dying. And I thought I'd bring this one in as well. It's not quite 1985, but Chernobyl disaster in 1986, where a nuclear power plant effectively blew up. You've probably heard about this. HBO did a drama on this. If you've not seen it, it's worth checking some clips out. Very realistic, very horrifying. And it highlighted the dangers of nuclear war, and it highlighted the dangers of the USSR working standards even more at this point. So, Task 1, I want you to try to understand when Gorbachev came in charge, why the USSR was in such a state. Can you explain why the Soviet Union was facing a series of problems by 1985 on your worksheet? And when you're done, which problem do you think was the biggest, and explain why? Make it clear why this was the problem Gorbachev had to deal with first of all. If you need any help, go back to the yellow slides and they should be able to help you with this. Pause the video here to complete that task on your worksheet, and when you're done, press play. Okay. So Gorbachev realised this when he took charge, and he said, we can't go on living like this. Now, Soviet leaders hadn't really said that before. They'd never really said anything like this. And Gorbachev wanted to change and reform the Soviet Union. And he wanted to do that inside the Soviet Union with new laws for the citizens and satellite states, and outside with international relations, especially with the USA. So he wants to make life better for the Soviet citizens, and he wants to improve talks and relations with the USA. Two key ways to improve the quality of life for the USSR. He did this in two ways. Two Russian words that you need to know for the course. The first one is perestroika, which basically means economic restructuring. It's changing that economy around. And like I said, the goods that were made in the USSR were of a poor quality. And this had made them harder to export. By that I mean sell to other countries. People didn't want stuff that was made. Gorbachev needed more smaller businesses to help the country to make money, and he needs people to make goods of a better quality. And so he did the unthinkable. He brought in some capitalism. By doing this, it would mean small shops could keep some profits. This would mean they would work harder and produce better quality goods to sell for more money, because they could get more money as a result of this. Workers could now actually start to earn more rather than always being set the same wage. It gave them an incentive to produce better quality goods. So some capitalism came in. Which sounds like a great idea. The problem is that this was rushed. Gorbachev basically, as soon as he became leader, felt he had to announce this straight away. There was no time to waste. And this was confusing. It's not clear when this would start. Does it start right away? How does this work? What counts as a small business? And who gets the profits? How much profit do you get? How much do you get? How much goes to the government? And we need to be clear here, there'd been really no capitalism in the Soviet Union since NEP went in 1928. And also, the Soviet Union was a communist country. So although this was a good idea, giving people more cash if they produced better quality goods, it was rushed and it was confusing. The second term is Glasnost, which means openness. And for decades, the Soviet Union had pretended there was just no issue with communism. They'd done that with things like propaganda, for example, a secret police force to get rid of any rebellions, any opposition had been crushed. And this meant that problems that there were with communism couldn't be discussed, they couldn't be solved. And Gorbachev said, look, let's talk about these problems rather than hide them. He said, let's let people criticize our government, including Gorbachev himself. Let's reduce that censorship so people have got freedom of speech. Let's reduce the power of the secret police force. Let's let the people talk. This is the only way communism will improve, by highlighting how we can improve and making sure we do just that. So how did this work? We saw political prisoners being released. Politicians were now interviewed and some tough questions were asked, and this hadn't happened for a lot of politicians before. Censorship was restricted. People could have a better understanding in how the country was run. But all of these criticisms that had been heard by people just made them realise how much they wanted communism gone. They didn't want to change and improve communism, like Gorbachev had thought. They just wanted it scrapped completely and the capitalist system brought in. When people are hearing about the secret police arresting people without trial, when people are hearing about low wages and poor living conditions, people realise actually they want it gone completely. But what these very early changes in Gorbachev's reign show is that he is a new type of Soviet leader. Look, you couldn't imagine Brezhnev doing this, could you? You couldn't imagine Khrushchev doing this. You couldn't definitely not imagine Stalin doing this. And these changes did show to the West that this was a leader they could work with. Reagan was interested very early on. So, task 2. Can you explain what perestroika and glasnost were, why they were introduced, and why they, although good ideas, why they failed, what the problems with them were? There's a form for you to fill in if you want some guidelines, but you can write this down however you like. But make sure you bring in detail here, really show me understanding you know why these failed. The purple slides will help with this. Press pause to complete that task, and when you're done, press play to continue. Okay, so Ronald Reagan, by 1985, he had backed off a little bit. Reagan was starting to become aware of the fact that him calling the Soviet Union an evil empire wasn't maybe turning public opinion the way that it should do. So he had backed off the verbal rhetoric. By that I mean he'd been a bit nicer to the USSR. He was also aware of the fact that actually the money he was spending, that $1 trillion we looked at last lesson on warfare, was actually kind of taxpayers' money. And people had sort of expected Ronald Reagan to produce them tax breaks. They didn't have to pay as much. The reason for that is because he used to be governor of California, where he'd managed to achieve just that. So Reagan was interested in talks with the USSR, and now Gorbachev had shown he was the sort of person he could work with. Let's bear in mind as well, he's not a chance to talk to any of the three leaders. I'll bring that back again. He's not a chance to have any real face-to-face conversations before. With a younger person in charge, this seems like an opportunity. So they meet up in 1985, the Geneva Summit, and both men talk and both men get along well. In fact, they get on really well. And they did something that had never really been heard of before, where both leaders just got rid of their lawyers that surrounded them and their advisors, and they went for a walk, and they went and sat down by the fire in Geneva, and they talked. And what Reagan liked was the fact that Gorbachev could talk openly about the failings of the USSR. Gorbachev didn't pretend the USSR was something that it wasn't. And they actually don't make any formal agreements. They've just met. It's the same as you don't go on a date with someone and agree to marry them straight away. But this does show good working relationships between the two of them. They wanted to speed up arms talks and removing nuclear weapons, and they wanted to work towards human rights and improving the quality of the world. So that's 1985. 1986, they meet up again, and both sides had agreed to reduce nuclear weapons. Both sides had agreed that they would get rid of weapons they had in their country and other countries. But there was one problem. These talks ended because Reagan refused to get rid of the SDI system. That's what we looked at last lesson, that shield. And Gorbachev says, look, why have you got this if we're talking about removing about nuclear weapons? You won't need that shield system. And Reagan says, you know I can't get rid of that. You know that I'll look weak. I announced this in 1983. I cannot now say 4 years later, by the way, I'm getting rid of this. Gorbachev's convinced me. I'll look weak as a leader. And Gorbachev says, there's no trust here then, is there? And actually those relations break down a little bit. Reagan storms out of the meeting. He just gets up and says to his advisors, come on, we're going. But both sides were aware, both Reagan and Gorbachev knew that they could talk, they could argue, but they'd kept that working relationship going. They did respect each other, and they did plan for future meetings. That meeting happened the year after, 1987, in Washington, where we actually get a breakthrough with reducing nuclear weapons, the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And this basically, the technological agreement is they would get rid of all land-based missiles of a range of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. Don't worry about that too much. Basically, they're agreeing to get rid of a good part of their nuclear weapons, but it's not all nuclear missiles. And you would allow satellite checks, and experts were allowed to ensure that both sides were doing this. We're seeing nuclear weapons being destroyed here for the first time by both sides. This is what SALT II Treaty should have been in 1979 that was never signed. And it's clear that relations are improving. Here's the question is, SDI doesn't go. Reagan still keeps that shield, so Gorbachev had stuck to his guns the year before. Why is it that Gorbachev now says, fine, I'll get rid of nuclear weapons and you can keep your SDI program? Well, he knew that Reagan wouldn't give it up. He knew that Reagan would look weak if he had done that. Nuclear weapons had now seemed expensive and now seemed pointless, especially when you remember Chernobyl the year before showing the dangers of nuclear technology. Reagan had promised he wasn't going to invade Russia, and Gorbachev believed that. He believed actually Reagan had no intention of starting a second Cold War, and this was shown by him reducing nuclear weapons. And also, Gorbachev's clever here because he knows that this deal will make him more popular with the West, that he will be able to make future deals. On the other hand, Gorbachev doesn't look too popular in the USSR. He's let America keep the SDI system, and he's agreed to get rid of some of his nuclear weapons as well. There are some people in the USSR who see Gorbachev as weak because of this. The weaker he looks in the USSR, the better and more popular he looks in the West. In 1988, Gorbachev said there was going to be a reduction in the Warsaw Pact troops. He said that basically the armies in the satellite states would be reduced. Again, that saves Gorbachev money, just like reducing the amount of nuclear weapons did the previous year. And it also shows that the tension is decreasing. Gorbachev also said he would be taking his army out of Afghanistan. They had been there now for almost 10 years. The last troops left in 1989. They're no closer to winning. They're not beating the Mujahideen. Again, this reduces tension and this saves Gorbachev money. And in 1989, both Gorbachev and the new president, George Bush Sr., announced the Cold War was over and that they would be working together in the future. That tension had now gone completely as a result. And really, we've got to look at Gorbachev for doing this, for talking with the West and being open-minded. This doesn't mean that the USSR turns capitalist. It's still communist, you've still got the satellite states, and we'll look at those next lesson, how that part of the Cold War ends. But for now, both Russia and America have shook hands, they have said the Cold War's over, they have no intention of attacking each other, and they are looking to build better relations. Which is really an incredible, 5 years? When you consider the tension there was when Gorbachev became leader, how Gorbachev has turned that around in a short space of time. So, your third task and your final task for this week, if you look at that, why was 1985 a turning point in the Cold War? I'm looking for you to produce at least 2 paragraphs to explain why Gorbachev became leader and why that helped end the Cold War. I want you to think about his thoughts on what needed a change in USSR and why. His relationship with Ronald Reagan that allowed the deals to be made, the fact that they had a working friendship, the actual deals he made with the USA and how that helped change the Cold War, and the compromises he made for peace. So, for example, he backed down over SDI. He said that America could keep that. Many other Soviet leaders wouldn't have done that, but it allowed the 1987 deal to go through. The fact that he took his troops out of Afghanistan, he knew that he couldn't win the war there. He knew he needed to save money. Give that paragraph a go. It's quite there's quite a lot of information in there. Bring in that detail and explanation. If you need any help, the sort of pinky slides will help you with that. Pause the video, complete these paragraphs, and then we'll wrap things up. Okay, and that's it for this week. Thank you very much as always, Year 10. Completed worksheets, please submit them by Sunday the 3rd of May at 5 p.m. A reminder, make sure you hit and submit. Don't do brilliant work and then we can't see it. Any feedback, any issues, email me at gbrown@stopseyhighschool.co.uk. And your next lesson, looking at how the USSR and the satellite states turned from communism to capitalism, will be up on Wednesday the 6th of May. Guys, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Thank you very much indeed. Go outside, get some fresh air, look after yourselves and stay safe. And I'll see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.